And from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McKay, I first want to take issue with the statement you made earlier when you said, quote, the spill response has been pretty effective. I just spent Friday on the ground in Grand Isle, which, as you know, is one of the epicenters of the disasters. It's coming into not only the beaches but the marsh. They're trying right now to put a plan together to protect Barataria Bay, which is an area where they're starting to get oil behind the boom into some of these fragile marshes and ecosystems. We don't want to sit back and wait until the oil comes in to clean it up, and when in some cases you may not be able to clean it up for years. We want to be proactive, and we've been submitting plans. In fact, 75% of the plans submitted by our governor to have these sand barriers in place still have not been approved. And so when you hear local officials saying they're spending more time fighting BP and the federal government than fighting the oil, that's not what I would classify as pretty effective. So please go back and redouble efforts and do everything you can to work with our local leaders who have plans, and they're being blocked by BP and the federal government from getting those plans implemented. That's when it'll be effective, is when everything's moving by the speed of light. It takes, right now, at least 5 days in some cases to get answers on questions. That's unacceptable. So I would appreciate it if you'd look at that. I want to ask you about the relief well. Are you using the same method to drill the relief well as you used for the original Horizon well?
Well, the design of the relief well is very, very similar to the original well.
Clearly, that well failed. It was a miserable failure. You had 11 people die. You're still using that same method, or have you changed the methods of drilling?
That design has been reviewed over and over with the MMS. The failure of the original well, I think, is going to be a complicated set of decisions, equipment, and processes. The relief well, I believe, is safe.
Well, let me ask you then, on the last time you testified, I had asked you about disagreements on the rig. In fact, I had given you a report that you said you hadn't read at the time. Now you've had some time to read it, where there was a disagreement reported in the media between the head of operations on the rig for BP versus the head of operations for Transocean. Did that disagreement occur? Were there disagreements?
I believe in the Marine Board hearing a couple weeks ago, that individual from Transocean said that did not occur, that actual individual.
Okay, and so we'll see more, because more reports continue to come out that contradict that, but we'll see. I want to go down the line with the rest of the panelists, starting with Mr. Tillerson. How deep in the OCS do you currently drill? What's your deepest well?
I assume you're talking about water depth?
Yes.
We've drilled up to 8,700 feet deep.
87, of course, the Horizon was 5,000, so you're 8,700. Any incidents there? Y'all any blowouts? Any?
No.
All right, Mr. Watson.
I'll have to check on the exact depth. It's
deeper than 5,000?
Yes.
Mr. Mulva?
Deeper than 5,000.
Mr. Odom?
Deepest approach is 10,000.
10,000. No incidents, no blowouts. And so as we look at all of these other reports that are coming out, you look at the reaction, it still boggles the mind that with the exception, I think, of one of you, the President hasn't talked to those of you who are drilling in deeper water and doing it in a safe and effective way with safety as a top priority. Who actually reviews and approves those regional response plans that we heard about earlier? Mr. Tillerson.
Well, those would be developed in, you're talking about internally.
When you all submit those, who do you submit them to for approval?
Well, they go to the MMS.
So MMS signs off on them. MMS has to sign off. Mr. Mulva, Mr. Odom,
Same.
Mr. McKay.
Yes, MMS.
Now, if MMS, who's the federal regulator, signs off on these plans that, by the chairman's own admission, are flawed, why isn't MMS at this table? We have yet to have a hearing with the federal regulator who had an equal role in this disaster. 4 of you had absolutely nothing to do with this disaster, and you're here given your time to testify, yet the federal regulator, who's directly responsible for approving these plans, who actually sits there and approves the plan, who approved the inspection of the blowout preventer, still has not testified before this committee. I think there's no excuse for that. If we're really serious about getting to the bottom of this instead of playing politics, we'd have the federal regulator here where we can talk to them about real things that they did to approve these plans that failed us. And that still hasn't happened. Finally, I want to get to the Secretary of Interior's report that came out that actually led to this ban on drilling. And we have a copy from a majority of the scientists on the President's own commission that they were using, the Secretary of Interior was using as his basis for banning drilling, actually wrote a letter and came out and said, quote, We believe the report does not justify the moratorium as written. Indeed, an argument can be made that the changes made in the wording are counterproductive to long-term safety. The Secretary should be free to recommend whatever he thinks is correct, but he should not be free to use our names to justify his political decisions. A majority of the members of that commission that the Secretary of Interior and the President are hiding behind for the 6-month ban, again, the President's got to stop playing politics and putting politics over science and actually focus on his job under the Oil Pollution Act, which should be directing the response. Mr. McKay, your job should be paying the bills. The President should be the quarterback on the field. Our local leaders shouldn't have to go to you to get approval to protect the marsh. That's something the President should be directing you to do. That still isn't happening. That's something that needs to change. I would like to ask unanimous consent to submit this for the record, this letter from a majority of those members of the Department of Interior's panel.
Without objection, it will be.
Thank you, and I yield back.
In the record, the gentleman's time has expired. For the record, we have had testifying before the committee, the Department of Interior, NOAA, EPA, Coast Guard, and the
Would the gentleman yield?
Corps, as well as David Hayes, who is the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Interior.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'm glad to yield.
The only day that we had actual testimony scheduled by the Secretary of MMS was the day that the Secretary was conveniently fired. Why haven't we had an opportunity to reschedule and have MMS come before our committee? They're the ones who signed these reports. They signed those plans. They won't give us still the information on the blowout preventer test that was done on the BP rig.
You are right that it was the day that that person resigned, but at the same time, the person who did come to substitute was someone who is higher in the rankings inside of the Department of Interior, David Hayes. So,
but doesn't work for that agency.
The chair